All right, welcome back to everyone. And for those who are just now joining our conference for the first time, welcome to No War 2023. This is a bilingual panel we're about to introduce. So before I do anything else, I want to explain how the interpretation function works. Hola, bienvenidos a todos. Bienvenidos a la conferencia. Este panel es bilingüe.
Welcome everyone. This is going to be a bilingual panel, so I'm going to explain you how to use the feature of simultaneous interpretation. First, I'm going to do it in English, and after that, I'm going to do it in Spanish.
So if you do nothing, you will hear all the presenters in their original language, so some in English and some in Spanish. If you would like to listen to the panel, including the language interpretation, then at the bottom of your Zoom screen, please click on the interpretation button, which on some screens looks like a globe. Then you would select the language that you would like to listen in, so in English or Spanish. If you're joining from a mobile device, you'll click the three dots, then tap language interpretation, and then choose the language you want to hear, and then click done. If you're having any problems with the language interpretation, please let us know in the chat. And I will remind our speakers to please speak slowly and clearly to make interpretation easier. Para escuchar al panel con interpretación hacia...
To listen to the interpretation panel to Spanish, click on the bottom button that looks like a glove, and then select the language that you want to hear, either English or Spanish. If you have any issues or any problem, let us know in the chat box. Please remember, presenters, please remember to speak slow for interpretation to be able to be more clear. And thank you very much, Jose Navarro, for the interpretation service for this panel. So I want to thank Jose Navarro for this interpretation.
Janzen has been involved with unarmed civilian protection as a practitioner, doing accompaniment work all over the world, as an educator who co-created the first post-secondary program in unarmed civilian protection, and as a researcher. He is a recently retired professor of peace and justice studies and currently involved in unarmed civilian protection work in Palestine, Burundi, and other places. We recently featured him on the World Beyond War podcast, and it was a fascinating conversation. So we're so glad to have him here to moderate this panel. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you. You're turning it over to me now? Great. Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to wish everyone a happy fall equinox and also a belated happy International Day of Peace. So I'm very honored to be part of this to facilitate a discussion with three wonderful practitioners of unarmed civilian peacekeeping protection. I imagine there's a range of people in the audience of your familiarity with this. Unarmed civilian protection isn't really a household term, but its concepts are pretty straightforward and easy to understand and grasp. Very basically, I would define unarmed civilian protection as mobilizing trained, unarmed professionals or personnel to volatile situations in order to reduce or prevent conflict, or prevent violence using non-violent techniques. Now, you can imagine sometimes that involves the immediate situation and also at the same time, long-term goals. UCP, as we refer to it, operates on both immediate and long-term levels. Long-term UCP is part of many strategies in order to break cycles of violence, strengthening civil society, and fostering peace with justice. It's all about expanding our toolbox as we deal with conflict and polarization and breakdown in communication in the community level, all the way to the international level. We can share, I hope this panel will share examples with you. And overall, what we have learned is that UCP can address and and work alongside or replace conventional military peacekeeping, government military, armed insurgent, militia groups, proxy wars, conventional law enforcement, gangs, organized crime, armed vigilante groups, or armed citizens. All of these groups that I just mentioned rely on violence or the threat of violence in order to effect change. And UCP has been demonstrated to work in lieu of these organizations in order to break the cycle of violence. What is the current state? One thing that I have been involved in my role at Selkirk College is organizing a database of all organizations that engage in UCP activities around the world. And at latest count, we have counted 61 organizations that operate in 21 different countries or regions around the world. And no doubt, this is an underestimate. The question, if you're unfamiliar with UCP, is, does it work? And I'll just basically highlight a number of things which UCP is able to achieve prior to introducing our guests. UCP has been demonstrated to effectively engage in peacekeeping operations as effectively as military ones, at a reduced cost, at a reduced environmental impact, resulting in fewer civilian casualties, and with a larger likelihood of breaking the cycles of violence. I think it's really important to emphasize those things because not only is it effective, but it has so many more advantages of using our narrow toolbox of armed intervention or armed peacekeeping. That's all I'm going to say for now, because I'd like to now turn it over to our panelists. And I'm just going to introduce them. We have 3 panelists for you right now, and their names, I'll just tell you their names and then I'll give you an introduction. So we have Marna Anderson, Jhony, Arango, and Nélida, Nieves. Nélida, oh, she's here. I see that Nélida is now here. So that's great. We have all 3. So we're going to do it in this order. We're going to start with Marna, and then we'll have Nélida, and then we'll have Jhony. Let me just take the opportunity to introduce Marna at this point. Marna Anderson is the director of Nonviolent Peaceforce USA. She is a nonprofit leader with expertise in organizational effectiveness and major donor fundraising. She has served organizations focused on human rights, conservation, and violence against women and children. She traveled extensively in Central America during the times of conflict in the 1980s and lived in El Salvador for 4 years during the peace, after which the peace accords were signed. While in El Salvador, she worked in a repatriated community on economic development projects for women and helped establish a program educating women and girls on domestic violence. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Marna. Thank you. I'll remind you that you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for being here today for this presentation. I will be talking about Nonviolent Peaceforce work in Ukraine, and I will also be talking with the context I'm more familiar with, it's the United States. And I have to say I've really enjoyed working on this panel, or preparing for this panel. It's really provided some space and time to see the similarities and differences in the implementation of UCP in 2 very distinct contexts. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides I want to share with you. I'll do that now. There we go. I'm hoping you can see that.
Looks great.
Okay. Thank you. So before we start talking about the work in these particular locations, I just want to share the foundation from which Nonviolent Peaceforce works. We are grounded in community-based initiatives that build capacity for self-protection and violence reduction using unarmed and nonviolent approaches. Our intention is to implement programming at the time frame that works for local community members and our partners, or as we often say, our intention is to move at the speed of trust. Our work is rooted in our core values of nonviolence, nonpartisanship, the primacy of local actors, and civilian to civilian action. We center our work on those that are most impacted by violence, and we address the protection needs as they define them. It is not advancing. There we go. So in the United States, we have offices in 2 locations, the Twin Cities and New York City. We have 9 program staff, 3 in New York, 6 in the Twin Cities, so we're pretty small. I'm also in regular conversation with a small group of Portlanders, exploring how UCP could be implemented to reduce violence and the potential for violence between the housed and the unhoused and within tiny villages and encampments. Additionally, we have volunteers in Chicago who provide protective presence and accompaniment at community events and rallies. As you can see from this map of Ukraine, we are working on the front lines in several parts of the country. We have approximately 50 staff, about 85% of them are Ukrainian, and we have had a presence in Ukraine since April of 2022. So both locations, we are investing more resources, again, where there are serious protection needs that have been identified by communities on the ground. In the Twin Cities, it's in North Minneapolis, as you can see on the left, the Welcome to North Minneapolis sign, and then on the right, Izium in Donetsk, Ukraine. Both of these places, our partner organizations have helped identify as areas where we can do support and uplift their efforts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the United States. I'm going to start from the left of the pictures and move to the right and just kind of describe some of our programs. I've been asked to share some successes. And I think in the previous session, they talked about not really having great data to talk about the success of different nonviolent actions. And I will say we are really working hard to across our organization to identify how the impacts, looking at social impact and social cohesion, the reduction of violence, the sense of safety in communities. And in the United States, in all of our programs, we have extensive evaluation. So we are working on that. I understand sometimes it's hard to prove what doesn't happen in some of these situations, but I hope that there's more conversations about that during the next couple days. So safe walks and safe zones, our primary, this is in New York on the picture on the left, our primary partnership in New York is the Asian American Federation. And we are the training and accompaniment partner for their Hope Against Hate campaign. Our goal is really to build the capacity of AAPI organizations and people in Queens and Brooklyn to have the skills needed to protect one another from the increasing number of hate crimes directed against Asian Americans. So in addition to doing kind of trainings on nonviolence, we have helped create an accompaniment program, and organizations that we've trained are taking on that work. And so that's really how we try to help build that capacity. After a training recently, one participant said, this training was so crucial to our hate crime prevention work because we can go back to our communities, whether it's working with youth, women, or elders, and share this information. I've been doing this work for almost 2 years now, and I learned so much today about myself and how to respond in these situations of crisis. The middle photo is a picture of some work we're doing also in New York. But we also are working in the Minneapolis Public Schools. And after the murder of George Floyd, the Minneapolis Public Schools terminated their contract with the police department to provide security in the high schools. We were brought in to train the new safety specialists using UCP tools, primarily focusing on relationship building, but there is also some accompaniment. Most of the violence that occurs, it's after school day gets out and it's out in the community. So there's been some accompaniment with that. But it's really building a community of care And as one principal stated, a safe school is a place where everyone feels like they belong, and that's what we're trying to create. We've expanded that program last year to include student safety teams in 2 of the high schools. It's a pilot project supported by the Center of Disease Control. After regular meetings and trainings, the teams then educate their peers and identify tensions that are brewing between students. So it has similar elements to it of an early warning, early response approach that MP uses in other locations. One high school senior said after a training in holistic safety and security, "Our biggest takeaway has been learning the skills to resolve conflict in a peaceful manner. There were resolutions that were made, which really helped us to see what we're working towards. The training helped me to understand myself better. It made me look at situations that I find myself in from a different perspective." And finally, the picture on the right is a recent convening we had with some of our partner organizations in North Minneapolis, where we have a community peace building program. And one of the main partners in that program is a group called Emerge, when they work with young men who have been involved in clique and gang violence. And when that training started in 2020, one of the first activities that we did is we asked the young men to take a step forward if they believed that nonviolence was a way for white people to silence Black people. And they all stepped forward. So over a course of 3 months of regular meetings, trainings, and conversations, the participants began to understand and believe more fully in the effectiveness of nonviolence in resolving conflict. Several provided protective presence at the polls in 2020 and at protests during the Derek Chauvin trial and community events such as the Somali Independence Day. When we asked them why they wanted to be a part of Nonviolent Peaceforce, they said, we used to be a part of the problem, but now we're working to be part of the solution. We now are able to go into some of our communities and we know something about how to try to stop the violence. These young men have put those skills into action and prevented armed conflicts and shootings at different points. And this really happened because they had relationships with people on the ground. And it was a hard line for them to follow. And there was a lot of mutual support and a lot of conversation between them, how they could build trust with people and how they could actually use what they were learning for the better of their community. One of them said, "We're not used to talking. All we are used to doing is yelling and screaming, trying to get somebody to hear us, but I'm trying to get them to understand that we can talk it out without using violence." Talk a little bit about Ukraine. I just wanted to say one other thing. Well, I'll go into that later. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Ukraine. So when we started working in Ukraine, it really quickly became apparent that there was a gap between the humanitarian aid that was happening on the ground through the efforts of volunteer networks and what the large humanitarian aid groups that had the funding, what they were focusing on. And Nonviolent Peaceforce saw that there was an important role that we could play to connect the larger organizations to those volunteer networks and to focus on the needs as identified by the volunteer networks. So early on, we began to work to help evacuate civilians in partnership with an organization called Help Kharkiv. We arranged for buses, drivers, and fuel to support over 200 civilians to get away from the front lines. And at the same time, we were contacting decision makers and officials to advocate for increased support to those organizations. A lot of the organizations have very limited resources. They're often run by volunteers, and they were yet bearing the heaviest load of humanitarian aid in the front lines. It also started working on helping people flee by getting them their documents. As you can imagine, it's not just a hassle, it was dangerous. And so we worked with a group called the 10th of April, and we provided protective accompaniments for more than 80 people to access essential legal support and identification. We traveled with them to their appointments, making sure they could get through military checkpoints safely. So similar to the work in Minneapolis, Nonviolent Peaceforce in Ukraine is building those coalitions and creating opportunities for different groups to come together, find each other, and generate ideas for better collaboration and increased safety. In November, Nonviolent Peaceforce hosted a networking and partnership meeting with volunteer collectives, civil society organizations, national and international NGOs, and it was the largest gathering of organizations in southern Ukraine since before the Russian forces invaded on February 24th. Lastly, we have been working to provide PPE, personal protective equipment, to the volunteers. It's costs about $450 to $1,000 and it's been largely impossible for a lot of those groups to get to access what they need to do their work more safely. So we started a lending program. And what I'd like to do, it's not showing my screen, and I'd like to share a 3-minute video that really shows a little bit more about our work in Ukraine on the PPE and the first aid safety work we're doing.
Nonviolent Peaceforce Україна організував тижневий тренінг для усіх своїх співробітників по захисту та безпеці.
Within that training, we conducted an emergency first responder training. And the idea was to ensure that all of our staff had the knowledge and understanding of the tools
that are important that our colleagues who go operate in high-risk area have in order to be able to protect themselves while they are protecting others.
The idea was to cover emergency first aid to the types of threats that the staff may find both in areas of operation as well as in the office.
It included a lot of interactive exercises and simulations through which the teams could experience firsthand the types of skills they would need to develop in order to respond to a potential threat or incident.
Casualty event take place during our operations of work, that all staff would know how to react.
Something that you cannot divide from our work is a lot of our security is actually a result of properly done UCP work.
Мені було дуже цікаво приймати участь саме в практиці.
And you were like, oh, there's a mine! Mine! There we go.
Перший раз в житті використовувала для цього бронежилет та каску. Ми розглянули різні процедури, риск-аналізи.
It was a great opportunity to bring our teams from Kharkiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa to increase their self-protection strategies and preparedness for a potential incident while operating in country.
A training of this scale with that spirit is something quite unique that I'm just looking forward to replicate in the future.
Thank you for showing that. And that was, as you could see, that was a staff training that we're now doing some replications of for those volunteer networks, in addition to lending the flat jackets, the helmets, the PPE, and doing that first aid training for those volunteer networks that we're working with. We're deepening our partnerships in both North Minneapolis and Odessa. It was with great surprise when I was at our management team meeting one morning, and I was talking about starting a community hub for nonviolence and safety in North Minneapolis, and the head of mission for Ukraine WhatsApped me, and she said we're doing the same thing in Odessa and a couple other places. So Typically, our offices are really just staff offices. In both of these locations, we are actually opening it up to community where we can do more collaboration and coordination with local communities on the ground. I think this is a really great initiative for both of our work in North Minneapolis and parts of Ukraine. So it builds that social cohesion, and it reduces it reduces some of the internal conflicts that happen in these contexts as well. So that's all I'm going to share with you right now. I think I'm just at time, and thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Oh, okay, if it's okay, Rachel, I'll just jump in. Thank you very much, Marna. We look forward to more of a discussion once all the presenters are done, but that was a lot of great information. Right now, I'd like to go ahead and present to you our second presenter, Nélida Nieves, who is a Colombian volunteer with Peace Brigades International, or PBI. She works with Honduras PBI. PBI is a non-governmental organization that promotes the protection of human rights and the transformation of conflicts by nonviolent means. Through international accompaniment, PBI provides protection to individuals, organizations, and communities taking action in defense of human rights. In this manner, it contributes to protecting the space for initiatives in favor of human rights, social justice, and peace. In Honduras, PBI has been accompanying organizations defending land and territory, freedom of expression, and LGBTI+ rights since 2013. Through international presence that supports, protects, and opens a space for action for those facing repression for their work, PBI Honduras has sought to contribute to the improvement of the human rights situation in that country. So welcome, Nélida.
Buenas tardes. Tenemos unos problemitas con la
Sorry, I
cámara.
have a problem with my camera, so I cannot show you my face. I'm really sorry about that. But we are here. We are International Brigade of Peace. We work as volunteers in Honduras, as you said it before. And we are going to do our presentation. Two of us are going to make the presentation. Here with me is Zsófia, who is going to help me with the presentation. So Zsófia will start out the presentation. And after Zsófia, it'll be my turn. Zsófia, please go ahead. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And we are sorry again for not being able to use our camera. You know, technology didn't work today. I'm sorry. I'm going to start by saying, or by introducing a little bit of the context in which we work here in Honduras. Honduras is one of the countries which is characterized for a lot of inequality here in Central America. And even though it's not officially at war, you could say that there is a hidden war that's been happening for decades or even centuries. A lot of conflict and a lot of violence that is centered around possession of land, uneven distribution of land. In 2009, after the coup in 2009, we saw an increase of militarization and patterns of violence against those fighting for human rights, who work in this defense of land and territory and the rights of sexual diversity or gender diversity or freedom of speech. As PBA International, the Honduras project, we got to the country after the coup
Internacional vio con mucha preocupación el aumento
PV International saw with great concern the increase on violation of the human rights. We followed the situation closely, and in 2010, there was the first petition of supporting them. After that, the project started in an exploratory phase to know well the context, to have more contact with the organization and explore how we could have a permanent presence in the country. It was, it happened in 2013 is when this happened. So ever since 2013, the project has been here in Honduras. PV as such gives integral support to human rights defenders who are at risk. This means that we work in different areas, such as physical support or through communication, and also psychological support.
Y muy importante que siempre trabajamos
It's
bajo
very
petición.
important to know that we always know under petition, under request, and as per our principles, which are non-violence, no partisanship, and non-inherence or non-involvement. So those are our three core guidelines through which we develop our work here in the site, on site. Now I want to give Nélida the floor to explain you a little bit more what these areas of work imply. Thank you very much, Zsófia. We also want to highlight that as PVI, we are an international NGO, and we have a wide network that allow us to act and defend those human rights leaders and to be able to have incidents nationwide and internationally. So we have a network that is very important because locally we have entities that we work with, entities that work on human rights, such as FONADE, which is an organization or an entity of the state that is in different regions in the country, and they can help when there is an emergency. So they have records of all the conflicts around the country, and that's why we have incidents with them. We also work with the police force, with the national police, and other entities that had to do with this particular topic. We also have another network with the national groups in Europe, in different countries, in the United States, and also in Canada. Canada is an important site since they help us a lot in distributing information when we work with our social media. We are always publishing or posting our events, newsletters and all those kinds of information. And Canada is the national group in Canada, PVI Canada, is a very important partner. So it's very important. We invite you to visit the PVI Canada site and also ours, which is PVI Honduras. So we wanted to talk a little bit about or share a little bit our experience in supporting. As Zsófia said, we do integral support that has to do with three important areas. It has to do with the physical support itself, which is, as it says, physically support those people that have an agreement with us, either organizations or people who have an agreement with us, because as we stated before, we support by request. We give our support by request, and we do it, physically go with them to their daily activities if they request it, but also to their activities of defense of their rights. For instance, audiences, public audiences that they have to deal with, because unfortunately in this country, when farmers or human rights leader dares to speak up or defend their land, they are put to trial or criminalized. And in the case of recovery of the land, they get displaced, or their land is seized. And sometimes they even attempt on their lives. So those are quite difficult things for these farmers and these leaders. So our work is to help them, to support them to go to these meetings. A case that is very interesting, we supported an organization that is called CNTC, which is National Center of Farmer Workers. And in their process of recovering their land, they have to face these kinds of criminalization or these kinds of actions against them. So we support them. We go to the judge. We tell them that we are an international organization that has international support. And it's interesting how the judge changed his attitude. When they don't have this support, so it's a different attitude. So that's an interesting part, because the expression of the farmers is that they feel that they are being hurt, and that's why they need our support. So it's quite interesting, because we are working there, we are doing incidents, and we are physically supporting them. On the other hand, we also have Accopil. Many of the people that are listening know what Accopil is. It's an organization or an entity where Berta Cáceres belonged to this association. She was a social human rights leader, and she was killed. She was assassinated. Besides all, or in spite of the things that happened, they continue working with the farmers and the indigenous communities in the region. They have nationwide incidents, but they specifically work in the region where Berta Cáceres was born. There's a case that I wanted to share with you, which is when during pandemic, the organization started to give humanitarian support, humanitarian help, and we would deliver groceries to the communities. So even though we had the pandemic and there was a big crisis on food, leaders were still persecuted. During that opportunity in 2020, they were traveling on their pickup truck with the groceries. And this pickup truck, the leader, his name is Jose, this leader was stopped at a checkpoint. They removed his face mask, the COVID face mask. His ID was taken. He was detained, and fortunately, he was able to call his organization, and we, as a PVI, started to work there to call the police and the army that were the ones who detained him. It was very stressful situation because we were telling them this guy is a leader of the community. He must be treated respectfully. His rights must be respected. And they said that he belonged to the Maras, which are gangs, criminal gangs that we have in Honduras. They're called the Maras. And many other things that they were telling him. And in spite of everything, he was released 1 hour later, or maybe 2 hours later. And it happens a lot of times in Honduras, when they don't have a way to accuse them, he's detained usually for 24 hours. And of course, the person is at risk during this time. I also wanted to talk about the support that we give to the LGBTQ plus community. We work with 2 organizations. One of them, ever since 2015, we work with an organization that is called Arcoiris or Rainbow. And it's quite interesting working with them because they have a safe house to support the community. It's a free, a safe space, a safe haven, a peace haven. And it's a house where they feel protected. They trust the people there, and they can talk about their situations and their issues. So it's always in danger, this place is always in danger. So we support them. So we call these meetings rondas de oficinas or office rounds. So we do presence with our green vests, and that makes it possible to be more visible so that the likely aggressors around the house know that they have support, that these people with the green vests are coming off into the house and they feel dissuaded. We also support trans women that are always in problems, in trouble, or they are permanently killed. Many Many of them are killed. Many people of this community are killed. And we support them. We help them when they go to the hospital, because it's very difficult at the hospital for them to receive attention, because of their gender identity. In Honduras, they have not approved these laws on gender identity. So ever since that moment, when they arrive to the hospital, they have to show their ID card, and it does not match. It's a men's ID versus women, which is what they are. So that's where the conflict starts, with the healthcare people. Just when they start coming into the hospital, we have to go there. We have to talk with the personnel, with the staff of the hospital. And depending on the aggression that they have suffered. So it's a whole process, it's both physical and emotional, because they feel supported. And it's been quite interesting, the feedback that we have received from them.
Un caso particular de acompañamiento emocional.
There's a particular case of psychological support or emotional support during the pandemic. A transgender girl named Scarlett was killed. And people around her felt very affected because of this crime. So PBI worked on some workshops, some empowering workshops. So we helped on the process of saying farewell to their partner and being able to speak up and express their fears and their concerns and what they were feeling, facing this difficult situation they were going through. So it was they were quite happy with PBI because of this process of catharsis. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. And we'll be waiting for the questions at the end. I just wanted to add one more thing, if I have time. I just wanted to add one more thing. Besides the support, the different kinds of support that we provide, we also facilitate spaces to improve capability on protection that allows these social leaders in their communities to be able to empower themselves and to learn or to have tools to improve their situation of security, to identify risks, and to establish strategies in order to prevent we have carried out a series of workshops lately, and it's quite a nice process. Because we can see how they own those tools and how they learn to identify risks in order to lead their own processes as well. Because the idea is to help them guarantee their own security. That's our objective. Because our objective is at some point leave the country. Nélida, I'm sorry, but Time is running out. No, that was pretty much it. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Nélida and Zsófia, from Peace Brigades International in Honduras. Now we're going to move on to our final presenter, who is Jhony Arango. Jhony Arango is from Medellin, Colombia, and he is part of the ECAP Colombia team, an international solidarity and accompaniment organization. Jhony is the person who has decided to take actions to promote different transformations in life that are necessary. He is an anti-militarist, and from a very young age, he decided not to carry a weapon and to be a conscientious objector to military service in Colombia. This has led him to be an activist committed to social change. He's been an activist for more than 21 years, beginning at a young age, assuming protest actions. And Jhony has worked in different anti-militarist organizations and collectives in Colombia and Latin America. He has also done this for other international organizations, such as Peace Brigades International in Honduras. He met ECAP in 2019, and that same year, he worked on building a delegation and trained to be a reservist. Welcome, Jhony.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you very much for ECAP Colombia. Thank you very much to my partners, to Marna and to Nélida in Honduras. From ECAP International, we work with basic principles, which are nonviolence, and to create partnerships to transform Operation Violence. So in that sense, we take on these nonviolent strategies and also strategies to break oppression. With those principles in mind, we work in different countries. There's a team in Iraq, in Kurdistan. There's another team working in Lesbos with migrants, which is in the Aegean region. And there's the team in Palestine. And we got some temporary teams throughout the year in the border between Mexico and the United States. We have teams that work with immigrants, and in Canada, people who work with indigenous communities. And there's the team in Colombia. We've been working around 22 years in this territory. We are working in the region of Magdalena Medio here in Colombia, and also the northeast of Antioquia. But mainly our action focuses on Magdalena Medio, where we have the office in Barranca Bermeja City.
Tanto el Magdalena Medio como
both Magdalena Medio and northeast of Antioquia are regions that have been historically affected by the Colombian armed conflict, which has been active for more than 60 years. In this region, we have different armed groups, both from the state and insurgent groups, and also paramilitary groups. So we have a diversity of actors or stakeholders which objective is to control the territory. One of their main objectives or ways to act is in the territory. due to different situations, they want to take control of the territory, natural resources, mineral resources, hydrological resources, environment, and so on. That's why most of the civil population is affected by this conflict. So broadly or mostly rural communities or the farmers. So in Colombia, we are working on supporting this organization. One is called Accompaniment, which is Corporation of Humanitarian Action. For the northeast of Antioquia, that's the area of work. And we also support the OFP, Popular Feminist Organization, which is one organization with more than 50 years working for rights of women in Colombia. And we also work with an association called Agropegu in the municipality of Puerto Wilches. It's a farmers association. So our partners, Agropegu and Cocupana, work on defending the land and the territory, and the OFP in the different municipalities focuses on rights of women, human rights of women. So with this context, the main work we are carrying out is physical support. So we support the communities and the organizations in their different activities. Mainly Caucupana, who works in humanitarian actions, humanitarian camps. They work on self-protection strategies in the territory because their main objective is for the farmers' communities to remain there in the territory, not to be displaced. With Concupana, we work mostly in this area. With the Guayabo Association, we also work with staying in the territory, but mainly access and usage of land. Because there are farmers communities that survive or their livelihood depend on what they grow. And they are living in a territory that is being disputed by landowners and private stakeholders. And as I said before, with the OFP, all the actions on defense of human rights of women. So the different activities that they carry out, these partner associations require our support, our presence, our physical support. We usually go in groups of 2. We support the caravans, we support the humanitarian actions, we support their movement, their commutes from one area to the other. And we are in the communities mostly with observation. But this also requires afterwards analysis, and it requires communication support and incident support. All we observe in the territory, what's done by these partner organizations, we bring it or we take it to local authorities and to government authorities, national authorities as well, and even international authorities. Mainly in Colombia, since our headquarters is in the United States, we have worked with the Canada Embassy and the United States Embassy in Colombia. But this requires to bring the voice of these partner organizations to these other entities. This means that we are not the ones experiencing the war directly. So what we bringing those demands, those requests from these organizations so that they can be served. So we worked also by request. It's not what we think that we should do, but what the communities want. They want us to help them promote certain things because they have their own incidents war, but sometimes they need support. And we, as an organization of international support, solidarity support, we do that work with them being a channel of communication with those authorities, either local, national, or international. So we are bringing our analysis, from our support in the field. And that way we can testify to what's happening in the territory. But the most important thing is what the organizations want. So this work is very important because with the leaders that we work with, which are environment, territory, land, they are people that they are threatened because of their work. These leaders are threatened. It's a constant threat to their lives, to their integrity, to their emotional state. So what we do is to support their work so that it can continue being done in the territory. Communities do not want to do work outside their territory because they have a big connection with their land, with their territory. And when that connection is broken, we break the social tissue, the community tissue, and we break a relation that's there, communities and nature, their environment. So that work, they want to continue doing that work in the territory. And even though they are threatened, heavily threatened, we in ECA, we provide solidarity support. We are there in presence, face to face. And it's also a political support because we believe that through nonviolence, we can achieve the transformation of that reality. So we want that reality of oppression to be transformed, and that's why we are there with these communities, trying to help them to continue doing their work. There are many implications for the communities, both physical and emotional, and also for ourselves, because they asked us, they made that question in the guideline for the presentation. Indeed, there are implications for us, emotional, psychological implications. So our work tries to take care of ourselves too, we have an objective, a mission of taking care of others, but at the same time, these communities with their work care for us and protect us. And we as a team at ECA Colombia, we also have tools, and we had to develop strategies for self-protection, individual and collective. So it is a challenge, a constant challenge, which is both ways, or it works both ways, because it implies that as supporters, we also have to wonder about ourselves and about our collective group. So we develop, or we have a strategy that is called breaking oppression. And the idea is try to transform how we think, our mindset, how we act, how we can develop strategies in order to support other communities. I think that's a big challenge of nonviolence, the question of the individual, the collective first, it's always been there. But what about asking about the individual? And in that sense, as I said before, is a two-way work. I didn't mention this before, but sometimes we work, we go to workshops with other organizations, not directly supporting these platforms or these organizations of diversity, LGBTQ+, but when we are invited by these platforms, by these groups or these organizations, sometimes we go as observers. So somehow we are mediated by a context of violence where our work is important. And I believe the biggest achievement for us is to say that we are somehow trying to take care or care for life of others. And that's very important. The value of taking care of other people's lives and to have life enduring against war. So I'm going to stop my presentation now. I know time is running over. Thank you very much, Jhony.
Thank you, everyone. I would just like to thank all of our panelists, Jhony from Colombia, Zsófia and Nélida from Honduras, and Marna from the United States. I think now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. If I think we have a few minutes left for question and answer, and I'll let you take it from here. Is that okay?
Yes, I'll just say right off the bat, there are many, many, many excellent questions, and there is time for nearly none of them. I also want to let the speakers know there's some very nice comments in the chat, and some are also being sent to me about how important and powerful all of it is. Okay, what I'm going to do is make sort of one big question, and then we'll give it to each of the three folks to answer it, and then we'll have to wrap up. So it will be a two-part question. So the question is, okay, how do you decide where your work is needed most? And how important is it for your actions to be recognized as a non-violent actor? What do you do to make sure you're recognized that way? Quizás también voy a decirlo en español porque las preguntas también están en español. Entonces, hay dos partes para esta pregunta.
There's two parts for this question. How do you decide where your work is needed the most? And is it important for you that others acknowledge or recognize your actions to be nonviolent? And what is it you do to make sure that others understand what you do and that it is nonviolent? So let's begin with Marna, Nélida, and then Jhony.
All right, over to you, Marna.
Great. I'll keep it short because I don't have a lot of time. Where we go, it's needed most. It's really identified by the community. As we start talking, we do, an assessment before we go anywhere. Usually there's been an invitation sometimes from a funder or somebody that, has known about Nonviolent Peaceforce through another country program and suggests we go. And so it's really through those conversations, one-on-one, focus groups, community meetings. And then it is very important that we are, people know that we believe in nonviolence and that that's a core tenet of ours. Thanks.
Nélida y Zsófia, si ustedes quieren.
Nélida, please answer if you want to answer the question, if you want to share your thoughts.
Perdón, solo si me repiten la pregunta, que se me fue.
Quizás en primero Nélida y después a Jhony.
Maybe Nélida first. Nélida, can you hear us? The question has to do with two aspects. The first is how to decide if the nonviolent support,
¿Dónde hacer su acompañamiento?
¿A dónde? Sí, sí.
okay, where? The question is where.
Reconocimiento de la organización no violenta.
And the second one is recognition of the nonviolent association.
Muchas personas que lo que ustedes hacen sí es no violenta. ¿Cómo es que otros entienden eso?
¿Quieres contestar?
Bueno, en términos de que dónde priorizar nuestro trabajo,
In terms of prioritizing our work,
en el caso de que no tenemos capacidad para atender
in case when we don't have a capability to work in two areas at the same time, the decision is based on the risk. Where there's more risk is where we act.
que el acompañamiento tenga un
To make sure that the support has a bigger impact.
y puedan ser decisiones muy difíciles.
Although sometimes those are very tough decisions,
También porque
especially
de
because
manera integral funcionamos a través de consenso.
we work through
Cada
consensus.
decisión que tomamos desde
So every decision we make on the field on those situations is discussed as a team,
a un consenso.
and then we reach an agreement.
Y en cuanto a la segunda parte de la
And
pregunta,
regarding the second part of your question,
al momento de acompañar organizaciones,
when supporting these organizations,
lo hacemos bien claro que solo
we make
acompañamos
sure that it's clear
quienes intentan llegar
that we are supporting those leaders that want to develop their work through nonviolent methods.
y por otro lado,
That on one hand, and on the other hand,
PBI también funciona a través
PBI also
por ejemplo,
works with nonviolence.
mencioné,
You
la
know, the
unidad del equipo es muy importante.
consensus, you know, and the work with the team is very important, you know, the usage of language,
También como marca la no violencia,
you know, framed in the nonviolence, you know, the way we express ourselves, because we know words are very powerful.
en el momento de conversar con diferentes autoridades, por ejemplo,
And when reaching out with different authorities, we explain them very often, which is our methodology, so that they are clear and they understand what nonviolence means. So that aspect is always present in all the areas of incidents.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Thank you very much. Jhony?
Pues sí, muy similar. Pienso que
Yeah, it's quite similar. We are a small team, and with which we had bigger capability, but we support organizations that are at risk because of their work on defense of environmental rights and human rights. And we support the communities that are isolated and far away and neglected by the state because the state does not want to be there. So we support those communities that need a bridge so that their voice can be heard. And we do it through nonviolence because we believe it's a strategy, a transformation strategy that is quite effective. And one of our slogan is building alliances to break violence and crime. That's why we create these partnerships with the other organizations.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much to you all.
All three of the speakers, as well as to Randy. The amount of expertise and knowledge and experience in this room about peacekeeping, being a peace force, unarmed civilian protection, international accompaniment is just astounding. And we really thank you for sharing all of that with us tonight.